So thank you very much. It was very lively, I think, speeches which are touching the heart of the subject, and I was very impressed by the speech of Mrs. Robinson, and I want to ask her a question very quickly. How do you believe it is possible to implement this governance or these rugby principles practically?
I think it's a really good question, because we need to go sector by sector. I loved that idea of looking for the respect of each of the stakeholders. I think that's a very good way of putting it. In a way, now we need governments to take their responsibility. This is the first time in human rights law, if you like, and this is soft law, that governments have been found to be directly responsible. They have a duty which is heavier than the need to respect of corporations, and rightly so. But John Ruggie is quite adamant that what corporations have to do is not just a do no harm idea, it's a due diligence. So if you have a long supply chain, you have to know in your supply chain what's happening, and have shown that you have some kind of internal procedure as part of your corporate long-term I'm looking for a word and the word doesn't come, but I think what we're going to see now is a number of ways in which the UN itself will be active. There is a working group that has been established by the Human Rights Council, and that working group will begin the process sector by sector, I would say, in bringing those guidelines to a more practical implementation. Companies will be vital to this, and they will have to be, the stakeholders that actually drive the process to a certain extent. As I was listening to both of you, it's good to hear corporate leaders with such a sense of responsibility. But when I go to poor countries or poor parts of countries, business is very often not the friend. Business damages the environment, business pollutes the water, business takes the land with no compensation. So it's how we bring these corporate responsibility ideas, corporate sustainability ideas to small and medium-sized corporations in a way that is accessible to them. I was on the board of the Global Compact, the United Nations Global Compact, for a number of years, and there are about 70 networks of the Global Compact in different countries, and they involve small and medium-sized companies, and they probably will be a vehicle through which the Ruggie principles can become more operationalized. But it certainly is it's a very interesting challenge, but what interests me is that we've gone to a new phase now. We have a standard, we have soft law, and it's a question of operationalizing it.
And could you tell us a little bit more about the Global Compact experience, which is in a way, a first attempt, to gather companies and to invite them, and we've been very close to this experience, so I know what I'm. But it is typically a case where implementation is presenting some limits.
Yes.
And not only because companies are reluctant, it's because sometimes the way companies and governments or companies and NGOs, are discussing is not fully appropriate or fully, contributive to the right approach. And we see there the difference of cultures, not between emerging countries, but within also the developed world.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I was serving in the United Nations when Kofi Annan launched the Global Compact, and the first two principles are to behold the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and not be complicit in its violation. Then you've core labor standards, environmental standards, and the last one was to tackle corruption, the 10th principle. And it is voluntary, and it fits more the profile of traditional corporate social responsibility. It's an incentive to companies to sign up to the Global Compact, and also trade unions and NGOs are members of the Global Compact, but it's particularly companies, and to post the progress that they're making. But the posting of progress is quite weak. You don't have to post under each of the principles. So you could be doing well in environment and badly in labor rights, or, and so for that reason, there has been a sort of sense that it could be strengthened. The Ruggie principles take a completely different approach. And I mean, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Human Rights Council. It's a very difficult body at times. It divides hugely on issues, particularly issues in relation to the Middle East, or it can become very politicized. It very rarely acts as strongly as it has acted on these principles by endorsing them. It's a very strong. It was an incredible piece of work by Professor John Ruggie, and in my work with Realising Rights, we strongly supported him, where he consulted so widely with all stakeholders that he got agreement on the framework 3 years ago. And then he was asked to draw up guiding principles. And he drew up those guiding principles, and they were endorsed by the Human Rights Council last June. And now there's a working group to help to flesh out how they're to be operationalized. It will take quite a long time, I think, because they are quite transformative. But if they can be implemented, it will make a huge difference.
Okay. Maybe a question to Narayana. Just before we give the floor to the room, Narayana, you have heard about all our discussions. How do you believe that, or how do you see India, and the Indian companies, adhering to these new trends and to these Ruggie principles?
What principles?
Those Ruggie principles which were raised by them.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well,
how do you see in a country like India, these to be implemented, and how fast? Because for companies like ours, it's a huge issue, not just because of human rights, but because of competitiveness. It's clear that the more you raise the bar, or the governments raise the bar and implement what they say, then you have a much fairer competition and level playing field. But I don't know, maybe Narayana, you could...
Well, I think there are many Indian companies, including mine, which are part of the Global Compact. I used to serve on the board for several years. And as President Robinson pointed out, human rights is one of the most important aspects of Global Compact. Similarly, I think given that today we live in a highly interconnected world, given that there are lots of multinationals operating in India, given that Indian corporations operate as multinationals outside, the universally accepted, highly desirable principles of good behavior become very well known in any country. It doesn't matter in what part of the world you are. And given that these things have become highly accepted, highly well known, it is imperative on the part of corporations in India or elsewhere to practice some of these, because investors are demanding it, and today investors are pretty global. And the corporations are interacting with governments. And therefore, I think these practices have become very well accepted. For example, in the case of my own company, we have put all these things into our governance rules, and we have created whistleblower policies. We have created mechanisms to make sure that these whistleblowers have a place where they could indeed air their grievances, and those grievances are indeed addressed. I think it's becoming more and more popular. And I think it's just a question of the mindset of the senior management of corporations. As long as the leadership of companies says that, look, we want to do what is fair, we want to do what is respected, we want to do what is desirable, then it becomes easy to do. The biggest problem, as I often say, is overcoming our mindset. And only those of us who overcome our mindset are the ones who will make progress. And this is an important issue, and therefore the question is overcoming mindset. I believe that it has happened, and in fact, Government of India has, in its new company bill, said that they would recommend corporations to set aside 2% of their net income or profits towards corporate social responsibility. And I think this is wonderful. I congratulate Government of India. I congratulate the bureaucrats that have done this. They wanted it to be mandatory, but due to some pressure from many corporations, I believe they have made it recommendatory. But even then, I think it's a good first step. So, I mean, we ourselves today spend 1% of our net profits every year on corporate social responsibility activities. And, you know, for example, our foundation makes or addresses the basic needs of the poorest of the poor. I mean, we have built destitute homes, we have built hospitals, we have built libraries in about 15,000 villages. We have given scholarship to about 20,000 youngsters in rural India. We have rehabilitated prostitutes. I mean, we've done many of those things. And all of that has happened simply because the senior management and the youngsters in the company felt that they need to do something worthwhile. And that's how it happens.
So listening to you, we have the impression that emerging country companies can do even better than developed countries companies. What do you believe? What do you think about that?
No, I think I'm a great believer in learning from anybody that does better than us. I don't look at it as emerging or developed. I look at it as people that do things better than I do, and therefore I want to learn from them. And insofar as corporations throughout the world have that attitude that we will learn from people who are advancing leading edge practices, I believe we will all be better off.